For those of you who might be joining us or might be a little bit newer, Avon is now 2 months, a month and a half? 6 weeks. So yeah, month and a half, 6 weeks into his new liver transplant. And so he's doing awesome, and we've been praying for him. Thank you for praying for him, and it's great to hear from him. It's great to be together this morning as well. Before we get started, though, I just want to take a second, and I just want to give us a chance to breathe. I was just kind of praying as we were wrapping up our worship and praying about maybe what the Lord has for us today on top of what he's already given us. And I felt like he was just saying, let's just take a second to breathe. So why don't we do that? You can close your eyes if you want to, or don't. They're your eyes. You can do what you want. But let's just breathe. Don't forget to breathe out. Let's do that again. One more breath in. God is God, and we are not. That's a good thing. So we've been talking about mission and what mission is. Last week we talked about mission has a what. This week we're going to talk about what mission is again. And as we do that, just a little bit of personal reflection again. I like a lot of change in my day today. I get bored very easily. We like to stay active as a family. We do get bored, and that even comes into work a little bit sometimes. I get bored, and I always want to go do something new or find a new adventure to go on. The problem is that's not always possible. And the day-to-day tasks sometimes feels like a slow, mundane death. Anybody feel that way around work? Yes. It's like death by 1,000 tasks sometimes. Now, there is a way that I've learned to snap myself out of that. Because the truth is, you can't just get up and go. You can't just do whatever you want whenever you like. That's not how life works. We all understand that. So the way that I snap myself out of that is I have to reconnect myself with my purpose, my mission. I have to remember what my mission is in order to snap myself out of that. And when I take a second to do that, it's like a new sense of life and invigoration comes into my day-to-day mundane tasks again. The things that I was already doing that felt like death before, they are filled with life and vigor and all of those good things. And all because I took a second to remember my mission. The truth is sometimes I get a little bit confused on a couple of things. I get confused and bored by kind of the method of how I carry out my mission. And what I really need to remember is the mission itself. And sometimes I confuse those two things. I'll kind of integrate the mission with the method and forget that they're two separate things. And I think when I do that, that's when I kind of spiral into this kind of death by 1,000 tasks mentality. But when I recapture my mission and remember that the method can change based on what the mission is, I'm able to maybe not even just approach my day-to-day activities with a new life and attitude, but I'm actually able to rethink how I go about those tasks themselves. Sometimes it even changes what I do or how I do them. And I think as I was thinking through that bit of my personality, I realized that the church is in a similar spot. The church in America is in a similar spot. We've gotten to this place where we go through our everyday and we forget that there's a difference between method and mission. And sometimes we even confuse the two things, and over time we find ourselves in the death of 1,000 actions, right? We're just going through the same thing and forgetting what is the main thing. And when we do that, actually, we get so hyper-focused on the tasks or the method, we forget that it's not the same thing as the mission. And so instead of protecting the mission, we'll start actually protecting the method. And that's an interesting place to be. And it's not just that way in the church. It's actually that way in any organization. There's actually this really interesting work that's been done on organizational homeostasis and change. And we got an image I want to put up here. And as that image goes up, some of you are going to look at this and you're going to think, oh, I love these sorts of things. And some of you, your eyes are going to glaze over. Okay, we love you both. That's okay. But this image actually illustrates something to us, and it's about the development of an organization. And it really illustrates exactly what we were just talking about. At the beginning of an organization's development, we have the birth and the early growth. And in that time, it's characterized by a lot of excitement. There's a mission. We're going to go on this new adventure. We're going to get up and we're going to charge the hill. It's going to be amazing. And it continues on the momentum that's created by that continues on into growth as the organization grows and gets better at what it set out to do. And then right around the end of growth, we get into this maturity phase. We get into a maturity phase, and the maturity phase is where we start to think we've arrived. And that's an interesting thing in an organization, because once you think you've arrived, you've probably already gone past arrival. You've gone almost to obsolescence at that point. And what experts actually that do studies on all this stuff would say that an organization will actually start dying in the maturity section, not past, not at decline, but the death of an organization will actually start closer to the maturity level when we start already developing the mentality that we've already arrived. Okay, that's the phase where we start to confuse the method and the mission. We start to leave behind protecting the mission, and we start protecting the method. And so an organization or a company will look at the product that they have, and they'll start to protect that, and they'll think, okay, we've made it. And the moment they do that, they start cresting the curve, and they'll start going into decline, into aging, and then eventually into death. Now, one of the things that experts would tell us that can happen in here in order to change that is between the growth and the maturity section, that same place that there's a mindset shift toward death, there could also be a mindset shift. And that mindset shift actually leads to a whole other curve, if you can capitalize on it correctly. If the organization is willing to pay attention and focus and refocus not on the method or the product, but actually on the mission, then they can enter into another new birth, early growth, and growth cycle. And it continues on and on and on. And the idea is that an organization never actually has to die as long as it can do something well. And that something is maintain its focus on its mission. But the moment we confuse method and mission, we end up on the death cycle, not on the growth cycle. I think the church has seen this happen. The church in the West. In European countries, you go to other aspects of European culture, and you're going to see that the church is 10 to 30 years down the line from us and showing us what we can expect to see if we continue on our trajectory. And that trajectory is death. It's the obsolescence of the church. The church has become accustomed to protecting its methods instead of its mission. We want to be a church that keeps the mission primary and focus on what that thing is. We want to also differentiate, though, really quickly between our church's mission and God's mission, a mission of which we have a small role to play. So what we really want to do this morning is not define our mission. We've done that again and again. You can see it out on the wall, outside in the hallway. What we want to do is define God's mission. If we want to continue on into growth, if we want to continue on as not just growth as a small church, but as growth in the kingdom, if we want to continue being growing people, as followers of Jesus, we have to understand what God's mission is. To do that, I want to take us to a story of Jesus in Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. If you grew up in the church, this is an incredibly familiar story. You're going to have a song stuck in your head for a good portion of the day. You're welcome. Verses 1 through 10, Luke chapter 19. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He is gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." Now there's some significant things that we're going to be able to see in this story about God's mission. First, we start at the beginning of this passage. Jesus is passing through Jericho. He's not actually planning to stop, and this is actually more significant than it seems. Jesus is on his way somewhere else. He doesn't plan to stop in Jericho. He plans on passing through, but something happens. Now, this is just kind of characteristic of Jericho. Jericho was positioned east of Jerusalem, and it was on a heavily trafficked route between Jerusalem and everything east of Jerusalem. And so if you were going east of Jerusalem, you'd pass through Jericho. So a lot of things happened in Jericho. A lot of trade took place in Jericho, a lot of commerce, a lot of foot traffic. People would stop and spend the night there. They would take a break, they would eat, they would refuel, they would get whatever they need in Jericho. So it was one giant pit stop, okay? And that's what Jesus is passing through with his disciples. But then something happens. In verse 2, a man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. As he's passing through Jericho, on his way entirely somewhere else, Jesus meets Zacchaeus. And the first thing we're told about Zacchaeus is he was a chief tax collector and he was wealthy. Now, we've talked about tax collectors in the past, but if you're unfamiliar with what a tax collector is, they were a Roman employee, and they were in charge of collecting all the taxes. That's why they're called tax collectors. But Zacchaeus was a little bit different. Zacchaeus wasn't just a tax collector working for the Roman finance machine to pave roads and all of those things, which just, as a side note, Roman roads must have been something spectacular, because you can still go and walk on Roman roads today. There's some of our roads that won't even be here in 10 years, okay? But Roman roads, you could still go walk on some of those. And so the Roman tax machine was funding everything, that was funding their military prowess. And unfortunately, it was actually also funding the oppression of the Jewish people. And Jericho is a Jewish city. So what tax collector really means is somebody who's working for the man. They're working for the man who oppresses Israel. And worse than any of that is a Jewish person who works for the Roman government to help oppress his own people. That's really what's packaged behind this term tax collector, and not just tax collector. Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector, so he's middle management in the Roman tax machine. He's a manager of tax collectors, middle management, and he's responsible for helping set up all of these different aspects and put people at their posts and make sure all the money's coming in. But here's the other thing tax collectors would do for the Roman system, is they would take everything that was due to Rome, but then they would skim a little bit off the top. They would take a little bit extra from people. They would overcharge. They'd pocket the extra and give all the appropriate tax to Rome. So Rome was getting what they were getting. They were getting paid as tax collectors, but they were getting a little bit of cheese on the side. Right? That's why people hated tax collectors. It's a big deal. They were traitors and con men. They were traitors against the nation of Israel, and they were con men because they were taking and stealing and robbing people. Now, it also said that Zacchaeus is also wealthy. He's a chief tax collector. He's management in the tax collection system, but he's also wealthy. We mentioned that Jericho is this throughway, and it's a stopping spot. It's rich with commerce, and that means lots of taxes. All right, so there's a couple things that we know about Zacchaeus already here. Zacchaeus, he's a trader and a con man, and he is wealthy because he's in a very affluent area, lots of taxes being paid. That means a lot of people to rip off. Not a very popular person. He wanted to see, verse 3, he wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. We find something else about Zacchaeus. He was short, I can relate with that, right? I understand being short. Verse 4, he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him since Jesus was coming that way. He knew that there was going to be a crowd around him. And Zacchaeus, probably not being the most popular person in the city, it probably would have been very difficult to get through the crowd, even if he wanted to get to the front. It's not like his wealth and position could have bought him a front row line. Things would be very chaotic as a local celebrity is passing through. You see, Jesus' reputation would have gone ahead of him. When we got to Yakima, we were told that Yakima is a very small town. And we kind of chuckled about that because it's actually just the city proper is 95,000 people, right? That's almost metropolitan in size, at least in population. And we came from a town of 5,000 people. So we laughed a little bit when everybody told us it was a small town. But as we got to understand the dynamics of Yakima, we realize what everybody is saying. It may not be small in population, but everybody knows everybody, right? It doesn't take long to figure that out. Everybody knows what's going on in everybody else's life, and the more that we got connected with people, the more we'd be introduced to somebody, and they'd be like, oh, you know this person. Well, we know them. We went to school together. It's just all connected. That's times 10,000 in Jericho. All right, everybody knew everything about everybody. Everybody knew everything about Zacchaeus, and everybody knew that Jesus was coming into town. The word had spread. Both people's reputation had preceded them. So Zacchaeus gets blocked out, and this local celebrity coming through, everybody wants to see Jesus. They're crowding the streets, and Zacchaeus gets blocked out. So he runs ahead to a sycamore fig tree. Fun fact, like if you've ever seen a mulberry tree, a fig tree is related to the mulberry tree. So it has these really low branches, great for short people, and they were very popular to plant on the side of roads. So they would just been all over the place. Zacchaeus books it up there on his short, tiny little legs, and he climbs this fig tree. He knows Jesus is coming through that throughway. Verse 5, when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. Now, when I learned this song, if you don't know the song, just do yourself a favor and Google the Zacchaeus song after church. I'm not going to hurt you by singing it to you today, but just Google it. You'll find a fun little song. But I learned the part where Jesus said, Zacchaeus, you come down, for I'm going to your house today. I always I don't know what it was. Maybe my Sunday school teachers, they stomped their foot and they're like, you come down. And so I always thought Jesus was angry, get down out of that tree. I'm gonna break your arm. That's not what Jesus' heart is. It's a lot more joyful. He sees Zacchaeus, he sees this tiny little guy running up ahead of everything. And I think maybe he saw the head bouncing just behind the crowd, and Jesus is like, what is going on there? And Zacchaeus runs up the side, and then he climbs up in this tree, and he's waiting for Jesus to get there, and Jesus sees him the whole time. He sees him get up in that tree, and then when Jesus finally comes to him, he says, Zacchaeus, come on down. You got to come down. I have to go to your house today. I'm not sure what all this is, but I want to hang out with you. That's Jesus' heart here. He's not scolding him. He's not doing any of that. He sees something going on, and he looks at Zacchaeus and he says, Zacchaeus, come on down. I'm coming to your place. You and we're going to have dinner today. Now, I think there's more going on as well. I think that Jesus, a person who is both God and man, but also filled with the Holy Spirit, right? Our theology says that Jesus did what he did by the power of the Holy Spirit. When he was baptized, he was raised out of the water, the Holy Spirit descends on him, and then he goes into public ministry. Right? So Jesus did what he did by the power of the Holy Spirit. And so as he's watching all this happen, he's possibly seeing Zacchaeus run out, at the very least sees Zacchaeus in the tree as he's approaching him. And I think Jesus starts to look with spiritual eyes. And he looks past the reality that this person is dressed incredibly well. He looks past the reality that because he's dressed incredibly well, he's probably in some area of finance. And because he climbed a tree, he's probably not the most popular person in town. I think Jesus starts putting these things together, but he looks at it with spiritual eyes. And I think he sees Zacchaeus. I think he sees the hunger which Zacchaeus has. And he looks at Zacchaeus and he says, come on down. You and we're having dinner today. I'm coming to your house. I must stay with you. Verse 6, so Zacchaeus comes down at once, and he welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." He's gone to be the guest of a sinner. Now, people murmured. Maybe they murmured because they knew his reputation in town. They knew he was a chief tax collector, right? Small town dynamics, they know everything about him. But here's the other thing that struck me as I was kind of looking at this and reflecting on it. The reality that anytime somebody gets what we want, we'll find a way to be bitter about that. Especially when that person doesn't seem deserving. Right? Because in our eyes, we're always the deserving one and nobody else is. So they would look at Zacchaeus. He's getting the attention of this prominent rabbi. And the people murmur. They murmur because Zacchaeus isn't deserving, but he got Jesus' attention. What's up with that? That doesn't seem right. So they murmur. Here's the thing. I think we always find reasons to murmur. We do it all the time. I think we will always find a reason to murmur. And it was no different for the people in Jericho. All the people saw this, they began to murmur. He has gone to be the guest of a sinner. So they're murmuring, I think, because of something going on in their heart. They're also murmuring because it's just not right that a rabbi goes and eats with a sinner. That's not how it's supposed to be. A good Jewish person is supposed to be separate from sinners, not eating with sinners. And Jesus goes directly to this person's house. He doesn't just interact with Zacchaeus, he goes to eat with Zacchaeus. And so it causes murmur in town. Verse 8, but Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Now, there's a little bit of a contrast here. We see the murmuring of the people against the reaction of Zacchaeus. All of these people murmuring against Jesus, and because of that, guess who doesn't get time with Jesus? All those people. And now we see the response of Zacchaeus, an entirely different response. An entirely different response. He stands up and he proclaims, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Now, there's something going on here with the Jewish law that's helpful for us to understand and why this is such an extreme thing. Scholar Leon Morris helps us understand it by this extreme standard by saying, where voluntary restitution was made, the law required, can we go to that next quote? Sorry. Where voluntary restitution was made, the law required no more than the original amount plus 1/5. So Zacchaeus was cheerfully agreeing to do more than was necessary. So by Jewish law, anybody in Zacchaeus' position that had cheated somebody, they only needed to return what they had stolen plus 1/5, just a little bit on the side. But Zacchaeus says, "I'm going to give back 4 times the amount." And on top of that, Zacchaeus' wealth is already reduced by half. Now, what scholars would also point out is the verbiage of this exclamation from Zacchaeus is extreme. It's not subtle, it's not passive, it's not suggestive, it's extreme and in the here and now. Meaning that when Zacchaeus says, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor," that's not Zacchaeus saying, "You know what? I'm good for half of my possessions to the poor. Sometime I'd like to give half of my possessions to the poor. And you know what? If I've cheated anybody out of anything, I'd like to make that right too." Zacchaeus is not insinuating that he might do something. This is like Zacchaeus pulling out his checkbook and writing the check. This is like Zacchaeus saying, "No, right now I'm giving away half of my wealth. I'm good for it. It's gone." This is word and action together. Zacchaeus stood up and gave away half of his wealth and then said, "If I've cheated anybody," well, there's a really good likelihood that Zacchaeus cheated a lot of people. And so he's paying back all of the money that he stole plus. This is what true repentance looks like. And the fascinating part for me is that we don't have any dialogue between Zacchaeus and Jesus. We have Jesus coming into Zacchaeus' house, and then Zacchaeus just responds. This is just his response to the presence of Jesus. He doesn't have to be coerced into it. He doesn't have to be taught into it. It's not like Jesus sits him down, that at least that we're aware of, and says, Zacchaeus, listen, man, I see how you're dressed. Like everybody is murmuring that I've gone to eat with a tax collector. You got to make this right. If you want to follow me, you got to make this right. That's not how it works. Because Jesus had been looking at this little guy scurrying up in a tree. He looked for this person who was hungry, and he knew that's where God is working. And we can see that's where God was working because now Zacchaeus stands up and he gives away half of his possessions. He doesn't try to follow Jesus. He doesn't try to get in with the in crowd. He doesn't think he's going to be considered righteous or anything. We have no indication that any of Zacchaeus' social status changes. All that we know is that Zacchaeus responds extremely. If I've cheated anybody, I'm going to give back 4 times. I'm going to give back. I'm going to give my half my wealth to the poor right now. Without coercion, without manipulation, Zacchaeus responds incredibly well, while everybody else is left on the outside murmuring. That's why it elicits a response from Jesus. After Zacchaeus stands up and proclaims that, verse 9, Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham." Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. Now there's something that's interesting going on. When we think about house, we think about maybe 4 walls of some sort of shape and layout and dimension. We might have a certain number of rooms filling that house, closets, bathrooms, maybe a finished basement. Like that's what we think of when we think of house. But that's not what Jesus is actually referring to here. The word for house that Jesus uses, the word for house that the author uses in Greek, is actually the word oikos, which would actually be closer to household for us. But even then, we understand household as maybe me and my spouse, and if we have kids, it would include the kids. We might have a dog or 2, or a cat for some of you sinners. Just kidding. I'm just allergic to cats, that's why I say that. So that might be what's included in our household, right? There's these people that are in our household, but even that doesn't quite get us to the point that the Greek meant when it said oikos. Oikos for household meant everybody that was associated with your household. And this could have been extended family. This could have been, there could have been a number of relatives living with Zacchaeus. There could have been a mother-in-law, a father-in-law, mom and dad. It could have included them. Maybe if there was another generation alive. Zacchaeus was wealthy. He was the place to stay. He had all the amenities. And on top of that, as a wealthy person, he would have had servants in his household. Zacchaeus probably did very little for himself. He would have had servants to clean and cook and take care of tasks. All of that is included in this word oikos. All of those people are included in this declaration from Jesus, and there's something that we don't quite understand about what Jesus is saying. There's something a little bit mysterious about how we understand this phrase from Jesus. Today, salvation has come to this oikos. Now, the last I checked, Jesus has only interacted with Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus is the only one who's responded. He's the only one who has given away part of his wealth. He's the only one who has repented and changed directions to follow in the way of Jesus. But Jesus says today salvation has come to this oikos. There's something significant that happens because of Zacchaeus' response to Jesus. Jesus says, because this man too is a son of Abraham. Now, Zacchaeus had always been in the lineage of Abraham. He was a Jewish man. That means he descended from Abraham. But Jesus is saying something a little bit different. He's not just descended from Abraham. Now his actions have aligned with Abraham's actions. Now Zacchaeus' faith and understanding of God, his relationship with God, his level of faith is now mirroring that of Abraham's. And so when Jesus says this man too is a son of Abraham, he's saying his faith, his trust in God is now aligned with that of Abraham. And because of that, something interesting is happening in the oikos of Zacchaeus. Because of that, Jesus has entered into the household of Zacchaeus. Because of one person's confession, an entire household is now following Jesus. One person's response is exponential in the kingdom. I don't know how this works. I don't know why Jesus says it, but it's what is, and we see it all throughout the Bible. Jesus says today, salvation has come to this household because this man, Zacchaeus, is a son of Abraham. And then comes the punchline. Here it is. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. The Son of Man. Now, this is a messianic title. It's huge. It's Jesus identifying himself as the long-awaited Son of Man. You can go back and read Hebrew prophecies. The Son of Man is a significant term. It was the person they had been waiting for. Now, Jesus stands up in front of this household of Zacchaeus and says, the Son of Man has come to seek and to save the lost. Jesus identifies himself as the Son of Man and then declares what the mission of God is: to seek and to save the lost. Why did Jesus come? To seek and to save the lost. Why was Jesus looking for people climbing trees? To seek and save the lost. Why did Jesus slow down in a crowd when he felt a woman touch the hem of his garment? To seek and to save the lost. So many different methods to Jesus' deliverance and healing. So many different times he approached things different ways, but always for the same reason. Jesus came to seek and to save the lost time and time again. And he's rephrased this in multiple different ways. In Matthew 15:24, Jesus makes a similar statement in a different location. He's being begged by a Gentile to be able to be healed and to be able to be restored. And he says, I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel. Jesus hones down his message even more. He's for the lost. Time and again, he repeats it. Again and again. Here's the point. Here's the thing that Jesus reveals to us about God's mission. It's that God's mission is a who. God's mission is a who. It's always about people. It's never about retribution or punishment. It's always for people. Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. And so when he sees Zacchaeus, he sees somebody who falls into his who. And the curious thing is, there's probably hundreds of lost people lining the streets looking for Jesus, but only one was hungry enough to climb into a tree to look for him. Jesus sees that, sees where God is working, and enters into it because he was one of those who. He was one of those who was ready to accept Jesus, ready to accept him into his household, ready to accept him into his life, ready to respond. Zacchaeus was one of Jesus's who. Now, Jesus always reveals God to us. He always reveals the heart of the Father. And so what we see in the mission of Jesus is we see the mission of God. Time and again, Jesus is oriented around people. You see Jesus standing up and quoting the prophecy of Isaiah that he's come to release the captives and set free the prisoners and restore sight to the blind. That's all people-oriented. God has always been about people. He's always been about lost people. And here's the interesting thing about lost people. The only lost people are those who know they're lost. Jesus looked at the Pharisees who were every bit as sinful as a Zacchaeus, but just in different ways. And they were grumbling on their own again, and Jesus looks at them and he says, you know, I've come for the sick, not for the healthy. Jesus didn't mean one person was right and one person was wrong. Jesus meant one person thought they were healthy, one person knew they were sick. Just the same, Jesus came for the lost. The truth is, we're all lost. Even once we put our trust in Jesus, there are still bits of us that are lost. And we see that in the moments where we start trusting something else other than Jesus. We see that in moments where we feel fear or where we feel insecurities. Those are moments that we can identify where we're trusting something other than Jesus. Here's the good news. Jesus is for you in those moments too. Because even if we're following Jesus, even though we are found, there are still moments that are being revealed as lost, and Jesus wants to heal those as well. He's always coming to us, always asking to stay with us, always for us. God's mission is a who, and that's me and you. It's everybody who's willing to admit their lostness. But here's the beautiful thing, is that God calls you in on that mission as well. It's not just to you, it's not just for you, it's for others as well, and it's through you. And God is calling you to realize and reconnect with his mission around who? It's around people. His heart has always been for people, and he's asking you and I to enter into that. And you and I can identify and engage the who God has given us if we'll pay attention to a few things. The first one is this: watch for climbers. Okay? Watch for the climbers. Just as Zacchaeus climbed up in a tree, God has given us people in our lives that we need to pay attention to. Zacchaeus, that climber, represents somebody that God is working in. Because God is always working in people's hearts. He's always going ahead of us. He's always the one who changes people's hearts and prepares the way. And we have to be a people who are simply looking for the climbers. You see, I do think Jesus saw Zacchaeus, and he saw him with spiritual eyes and saw that God was working. And just the same, God puts people in our lives where he's already working ahead of us. And our job is to look for those people. We've said this different times and in different ways, and it remains true here. We see it again and again. We have to watch for the climbers. We need to look and watch for places God is working. And here's the flip side of that. We don't have to enter into the places he's not working. There are people that are open to Jesus, people that God is working in, and we go there. And there are people that are very resistant to Jesus, and it's not your job or my job to kick down the doors of their hearts. Right? That's violence. That's a power over sort of a scenario. And just as a side note, like, we get the power dynamics of our culture entirely wrong. We have a power over sort of a situation. And so evangelism in the church is really, really difficult because everybody thinks we're trying to gain power over each other. But when you pay attention and you watch for the climbers, you realize that what you're doing is you're actually just serving them and joining in with the mission of God. And in that way, you flip the power dynamic and do exactly what Jesus did, which is to bend down and wash somebody's feet. So we look for the climbers. Second thing we see out of Jesus in this story is that Jesus stayed with them. So stay with them. If you find a climber, stay with them. Now, this is going to be an incredibly difficult thing for us to wrap our mind around and actually change about ourselves. Because our inclination in our culture is to get as many people recruited to our cause as possible. We all have a cause, and we want everybody else to feel as passionate about our cause as we do. Right? That's always the thing. I know you have a thing, but my thing's better. I want you to come and do and be a part of this. And so we always try to get people around our cause. And so it's going to be a mindset that we have to battle. But here's the interesting thing, is Jesus doesn't see Zacchaeus and say, hey, come on down and get in line. Jesus says, come on down, I'm coming to your house. Jesus stays with Zacchaeus. And I think there's something here for us to learn as well, that if we want to participate in the mission of God, if we want to be for his people and the people he is working in, then we have to figure out how to stay with people, not just get them to come to our thing, but we have to learn how to remain with them. And here's what I think that looks like. If we're out and about and we're paying attention to somewhere God is working, and we find somebody, then we have to remain connected with them. Now, our initial response is, hey, I'd like you to come to this thing with me, but I want to actually ask you to resist that urge. And I want to actually brag on my wife for a second. She's incredibly good at this. So many times during the week, I come home and I'll say, hey, how was your day? What are you doing? What were you up to? And a lot of that's changing now with a new dance studio open for her and her times in other places. But a lot of times it was, well, I went on a walk today, and guess what? I made a new friend. Girls always making friends, okay? I was like, that's cool. What'd you guys talk about? When we talked about this, they opened up their life to me. I'm going to go play over at their house soon. Well, not her so much as our kids. Going to take the kids to play over at the house. I think she's a champ on the monkey bars, but the kids like it more. So it was not uncommon that she'd say, I met this new person today. We're actually going to get together. We're going to have coffee. Our kids are going to play together. It's going to be pretty awesome. It just blows my mind. That's the picture of staying with somebody. It's remaining with them. It's cultivating a relationship and mining out the reality of what God is doing in those moments. Because you may see a climber and you may see that God is working in somebody's heart, but unless we remain with them, we're not going to see the fullness of the picture of what God is doing. Zacchaeus in the story comes down and then declares his response to Jesus. And if we don't stay with people long enough, we might not get to see their response to Jesus. So stay with them. Whatever that looks like, whatever that continued relationship is, find the climber and stay with them. And then finally, just maybe more of a big picture thing that I find incredibly helpful. Just as Jesus stands up at the end of this and says, "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost," I want to ask you to articulate your who. Articulate your who. Every organization has a stated mission, and it oftentimes falls within the larger mission of something else. Friends, you and I are smaller organizations within God's large organization. And just as he sends us climbers, and just as he sends us random people in our paths that we need to stay with, he's also sent you to a larger group of people that you probably don't need to look very far to find. I want to ask you to start looking around you where you are. Maybe it's your own household. Maybe it's the people God has already given you. And I want you to just pray a simple prayer this week. Lord, who are you sending me to this week? I think oftentimes when we think about sending, we think about so far away. And it does happen there, and that is good. And sometimes God will do that, and I hope he does that more. But for most of us, God has sent you where you are. If you pay attention, you're going to notice that God is sending you into stores. He's sending you into lines at the grocery store. He's sending you into lines at the bank. He's sending you into all these places. And those are all good places to pay attention to climbers. But he also gives us workplaces. He gives us places that we see people on a regular basis. This is our oikos that Jesus is sending us into. And I think if you ask the Lord, who are you sending me to today? God's going to start showing you his heart for the who that's already around you. So my challenge for you this week is simply to start praying, God, who are you sending me to today? Who are you sending me to today? I think that's going to shift how we see things. I think that's going to shift our heart, and hopefully my heart's desire is that it starts to shift people's view of not just Jesus, but the church. You see, the church, like most of our culture these days, has learned to identify itself by what it's against. But what if we started praying this way, and we started becoming known for things we're for, or rather, people we're for? What if we were known as a movement of God's people that are for other people? How incredible would that be? I feel like the worst thing people could say to us at that moment is, I may not agree with them, but they are definitely for people. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that shift in how people talk about God's people. Let's pray.